And then as we move on with this postdoc, the student perspectives. Well, again, we've heard a bit about how people are starting to address this, but also we want to do it ourselves and try to. And especially this part is about doing it in Uppsala. It might be done in the UK and then New Zealand as well, but now I'm kind of leaving that part. So perceptions of it, and like Nick was talking about, and also Virginia before, I mean, they do have perceptions, and they might not be the same that we have, or even, I think it was interesting what you said, Virginia, about, yeah, I got new ways of thinking, whereas Matti and Henrika were talking about the biases. Like, this is really horrible because they give you bias. And yet, on the other hand, it also gives you a new ways of seeing things. So, but again, understanding what it is and what it's not. And we also want to kind of investigate how do they use it in a few different courses. We will be using focus groups and case studies. Then the faculty, how do they adapt to this? What kind of strategies do they use? I think we heard some really good examples here of how it can be used. But also, if you think about it, having assignments where ChatGPT gives you 95% correct right away, that's a bit problematic. So, but on the other hand, we've heard good examples of different ways of using it. So we're going to be looking at a few different courses, doing some interviews, doing some observations about what's going on there. So, competency-based education. We've been involved in trying to understand competency in different settings, not least ITTC working groups. And the competency is kind of the intersection of knowledge, skills, and dispositions. But I think the important part of this illustration, that's the task or the context. Because without context, it becomes very abstract and vague. But with context, this is a very powerful thing. You can go down and talk about individual parts in a lecture and talk about what kind of competency are you addressing. You can even describe a whole degree program by doing this. Very different levels, but it's kind of the same things. You can really talk about knowledge, skills, dispositions, and how they feel. And then by adding, what's the context? Where are they going to use this competence or competency? We have some discussions about, is it competence or is it competency? Well, for me, both works. And at FIE, this couple of months ago, we had this exercise, a special session where we were practicing how to do things like this. And you come up with a competency statement, and then you kind of connect it to what kind of knowledge elements do you need? What are the skills or skill levels you're talking about? What kind of dispositions is important to have this? Dispositions is kind of sometimes described as attitudes, but I mean, so it's, for many it's fluff, but it's not. I mean, this is important when you talk about the competence. And really, the big thing is, I think, context. You need to provide context, otherwise it doesn't really make sense. So, yes, it's coffee time now, but I just wanted to, well, if I go back to the study, we might get to the point of results where we describe strategies and recommendations. But I think the most important thing is kind of all these other questions. I mean, and I think we've heard today, most of the presentations somehow ended up in questions like this and even other questions. And I think this is why people don't stop talking. When you start talking about this, almost in any context, people have opinions. Like I think, Nick, when you get your students engaged, I think they do learn a lot because it matters to them and it's interesting. And I think the same goes for us. And yeah, it's scary in many ways, but it's also, I think, there are lots of opportunities. And then thinking about math is kind of like, ooh, what's going on here? I mean, like where is this coming from? All these connections, all this, what's happening next month, a year from now? Where are we? I mean, what kind of, and I think also like, yeah, it lies or something like that, but you can't just dismiss it by that. It's actually quite useful in many ways. But how do you deal with bias? Well, lots of questions. And let's have coffee and then we have a panel.